Welcome to Creating 5D Radio. Creating 5D is why we're here at creating5d.org, where we're building community through loving creation. We have an amazing collection of high vibrational beings gathering to play and enjoy, building lives full of rich experiences that we truly desire to share. We create projects such as community-authored books, this radio show, experiments in consciousness, events and gatherings, movies, blogs, whatever strikes a chord of joy, light, and love within the collective. By spending more of our time involved in doing what we love with people we love, we become love embodied. Soon we will have a grand opening project that will create the conditions for all who desire more love and creation in their life to join in and be the love they are. Watch for an announcement soon to join us. Tonight on Creating 5D Radio, we're excited to have our second guest, Nora Herold. Nora has been channeling, lecturing, and doing healing work for over 20 years. This weekend in Ojai, she is co-creating a workshop titled Implementation of 5D Technology with the Pleiadian Collective. She channels a multitude of high-frequency beings, including Yeshua, the 9th and 12th Dimension Pleiadian Collectives, the Lyrans, the Faeries, the Angelics, and Enara. Our host tonight is Lance White, best known as the host of A Fireside Chat with the Zany Mystic, airing on BBS Radio. Please feel free to write any questions in the box on the webcast, and we'll get to as many as possible during the next 2 hours. So now, let's welcome Nora and Lance to the show.
Well, hello, this is Lance, and hi, Nora, how are you?
Hi, Lance. Hi, everybody. I'm wonderful, and you?
I thought so. Before we bring in the collectives and start running down the fast track, I found something really interesting that you said in your recent interview with Marianne and CJ, which referred to a moment when your consciousness ripped apart, and that was when the awareness of Atlantis and Lemuria poured in. Would you like to share a little bit more about that moment and what kinds of insights you gained in that?
Sure. It was a profound and life-altering experience. I was 29 years old at the time. It was back in 1996. And I had gone through a particularly challenging period of time in my life, and I was very depressed and feeling isolated and cut off and very lonely, which I think often precedes a spiritual awakening. I often find that we run our programs and our stories in this very dramatic kind of fashion here on Earth. And I'm a former actress. And I have a hard time even using the word former because I don't believe that there's anything that we are and then suddenly we're not any longer. So I was used to high drama.
Yeah, me too.
And I was hanging out with a friend one evening, and she and I were doing tarot readings for each other. I'd been working with the tarot already for years. I'd been meditating. I'd been searching for something. I used to go to this metaphysical bookstore in Chicago, which is where I'm from originally, as Nora, and I would look at all of the books there on tarot and Wicca and witchcraft, and I would leave kind of feeling frustrated and empty because I was searching for something and I wasn't consciously aware of what it was. And she talked to me that night about a friend of hers named Wendy Kennedy, who had started channeling her guides. And when Amy said to me that Wendy was a channel and she was channeling her spirit guides, I knew in that moment that that's what I had been looking for. And that night I made contact for the first time with my spirit guide, Mirando. It was a very easy and effortless experience for me to establish that contact once I consciously understood what it was I was looking for. And I think that's really key for all of us in our conscious awareness. There needs to be a level of consciousness. We can't just have these experiences that are unexplainable and then go about our lives not able to explain them to ourselves. On some level, we need to be able to put them into a context now and take what used to be perceived as metaphysical, paranormal, out of the ordinary, take those things and make them incredibly ordinary now for ourselves. And that's one of my intents in my work, is to make this as ordinary as possible. While understanding and valuing the extraordinary nature of the experiences, and I do. So after making contact with Mirando and experiencing his incredible transmission of unconditional love, that moment is that kind of ripping open of my consciousness that I talked about on Cosmic Current on the Helene Lipson show. And as that happened for me, and as I began to hang out more with Amy and Wendy, and we began to channel together, I began very quickly to access my memories of a lifetime I experienced on Atlantis and Lemuria. It's the same lifetime. And part of the reason I accessed those memories is because Amy and Wendy were there with me in that incarnation. So the three of us were hanging out together, channeling together as much as we possibly could, at the same time accessing these alternate versions of reality where we were different. We had different relationships with each other in that lifetime. I was Wendy's mother and Amy's aunt, and it was incredibly wonderful and powerful and also incredibly overwhelming. I was trying to go about my day-to-day life as a waitress, failed actress, because that was my perception at the time, that I pretty much failed at what it was I thought I was here to do. And then experiencing all this intense energy and downloads, and I had all these, just really out of the ordinary things happening. I began to see ET ships, and I remember one night being really angry because a table was just sitting there and they wouldn't leave, and the man picked up his beer glass and it shattered in his hand. At the moment, I was sending this intense, please get out of my restaurant energy to him. And that was quite a learning experience about, what not to do with energy.
Right. Wow.
So, yes, that lasted for about a year and a half, that experience. And then I was directed to begin doing this work as my work here on the planet. I began to really understand at that point that's what I'd come here to do, or at least that's one of the things I had come here to do. I believe my main purpose for being here is to integrate my fifth dimensional identity, as is true for everyone on the planet.
Yes, absolutely. Now, one of the things that we were talking about just before the show started had to do with jumping to a new timeline and the shifts that are currently happening. And at any time that you feel that you want to bring someone through that, or one of the collectives through that wishes to speak about any of this, I think everybody is really, interested in what the shift entails and, learning as much as possible about this transition from 3D through 4D and into 5D and beyond. And one of the things that came up for me is that there are many here who come in from higher dimensions that are beyond the fifth dimension. So everybody probably has a different destination, if I'm not mistaken. Some of us will have the similar destination. So maybe we could talk about what's going on at this time to get the ball rolling.
Greetings, Lance. Greetings, everyone listening. This is the Pleiadian Collective. We were happy to feel you welcome us in, as Nora was already syncing up with our energies in that moment. And what you just did there, Lance, was you demonstrated one of the aspects of this new timeline you all have found yourselves on, and that is you are all operating as much more highly telepathic beings today than you were on April 24th. Take a breath, everybody, and we'll and all the other beings who come through will often remind you to breathe, because when we first engage with all of you, and that's how this works, all right? So we're not just moving through Nora's body and speaking through Nora. We are engaging also with every single one of you telepathically and energetically in the moment. It's the only way you can allow yourselves to receive channeled information. So every single one of you listening in this moment, every single one of you who chooses to tune in another moment, know that you'll be channeling yourselves. You'll be opening up yourselves to our vibration and our frequency. At the best of your ability, where you're at in the moment. And this is something we often find is very interesting for all of you, and you've commented on this yourselves, a lot of you. You'll listen to channeled information, and then you'll go back at a later point, and you'll listen to the same piece again, or you'll read something that's channeled, and suddenly you'll hear a completely different message or a new version of the information that was given. And that's because as your consciousness evolves and shifts and opens up, as you integrate more fully that fifth dimensional identity, you are able to access more information. So that's the big change here that we see for all of you on that collective timeline jump that happened on April 25th in alignment with the lunar eclipse.
Wonderful. And we're coming up on another event tomorrow, I believe. We have another eclipse occurring.
Yes, that's correct. There's a solar eclipse.
Yes.
It will reach its maximum eclipse point around 5:30 p.m. Pacific time tomorrow, May 9th. So for all of you all over your planet, you can figure out when that's going to happen for you. Not all of you will see it. This is one of those. This is an annular eclipse, or it's often referred to as a ring of fire eclipse, because the moon passes in between in a way that it completely covers the sun except for the outer circumference of the sun, because, of course, the sun is larger than the moon itself, and it looks like there is a ring of fire around the moon.
Is it any accident that the ring of fire greatly resembles an Ouroboros?
No, there's no coincidence. There's never, of course.
Right, of course.
That's right. And, those images that you're given in physical reality in this way are meant to trigger your unconscious understanding of things and bring those things into your conscious awareness. As Nora was talking about earlier, there is the importance of allowing your conscious mind to open up and understand. But one of the tricky pieces that you all experience while shifting is, more often than not, initially, you've got to simply run the energy through your heart center. So when Nora spoke about connecting with her guide for the first time, she wasn't given any kind of process or pathway to do it. She had no mental understanding of how to do it. What she knew in that moment was that she needed the connection. And she knew enough to open her heart in that moment and allow for the connection. Once that had occurred, Then her conscious mind shifted enough, meaning she dropped some of the filters she'd been carrying in her third dimensional mind, which allowed her then to have a better conscious awareness of what it is she had just experienced. And this is how a lot of you operate. You have to give yourselves conscious permission to experience something without consciously understanding what it is, because the third dimensional mind was not created to allow you all this level of understanding. The third dimensional mind was created to limit your awareness and your experience. You have a bunch of filters put in place that keeps you in a third dimensional vibration. But then as you begin to process more energy through your heart center and have these greater experiences and awarenesses, those filters begin to dissolve and fade away, and you begin to activate what we would call your fifth dimensional mind. So these are just our terms. We want to be clear about that as well. There are many versions out there, many stories and timelines about what it is that's happening on Earth and across the universe. And more often than not, the feeling of the experience lines up, but the words don't always line up. And that's because there are as many versions of reality as there are beings to interpret reality.
Okay.
We can't give you the be-all and end-all information because there is no such thing as far as we're concerned.
Okay. Well, that all resonates. And one thing about the moon before we go on into other topics is that there's been a great deal of discussion about the idea that the Pleiadians were actually using the moon many millennia ago to seed various galaxies with new life, and that there were DNA banks in the moon, and that during one of the galactic wars, I don't know which one, maybe we can get a little clarity on some of this information, it was raided by the reptilians, and it was moved to its present location as more or less a control and observation device.
Yes, we would say that happened during the Orion Wars. Pleiadians here again. And we like to always identify ourselves when we come back in because there will be other beings who are present. So that was during the Orion Wars. You know, that was near the beginning, actually, of the Orion Wars, and that was when the initial experiment on Earth was shifted and altered. So again, we're giving one timeline, one version of events here. There may be others who are giving other timelines, and those will be accurate for those who feel a resonance with that information. And the other thing is, as you all shift not just your current moment, but you shift your past, you shift your future as well, because all is happening concurrently. So what we tell you is your history today may be altered tomorrow because of the collective consciousness's experience in the moment. What
Absolutely.
we try to do, what we really work on doing with all of you is culling the information that is most helpful to you, most of benefit to you in this moment. And we'll be the first ones to say that there are times that we do not share certain pieces because from our perspective, humanity is not ready for that certain piece of information. For instance, recently we've been talking with you all about the first Earth, the other Earth. Now, that's a piece of information that we, at least from our perspective, didn't feel was appropriate to share with you until this year, until you had passed through that December 21st of 2012 gateway. And part of the reason for that was because if you had heard that story earlier on, it would have triggered in all of you an even greater fear that you were on the verge of destroying Earth. There was already too much information out there, too much fear-based information out there with regards to that 2012, December 21st, 2012 date. So that piece of information was held back until you'd cleared that moment and were in a space where you could access your memories of Earth's destruction. And a lot of you are beginning to access those memories, the memories of Earth's destruction and the time of the Orion Wars. And as those memories surface, and they will surface tangentially with this solar eclipse you're experiencing tomorrow, and some of you will experience it on May 10th, as those memories surface, a lot of you may find yourselves not understanding this is what you're remembering. Because this is how past life memories and other experiential memories occur for all of you. You feel the feelings first of the experience, and then more often than not, you try to find a context in your current reality to explain the feelings.
Can you share with us which galactic civilizations were participating in the Orion Wars, and give us an approximate idea of the creation of the first Earth? I've seen it in my mind's eye, and how that relates to the asteroid belt, which is currently around this present Earth that we're residing on now.
So as far as the galactic participation in the Orion Wars, pretty much every planetary system, some level. And it was what we would say, it was the darkest period of time in this universe. It was the moment where you all skewed the polarity. You took it out of a 50-50% split of light and dark and took yourselves, we all took ourselves into an experience where suddenly this universe appeared to be, and we say appeared to be because on some level, yes, of course, it's all just an illusion, appeared to be 75% dark, 25% light. And at that point in time, there was a call put out from those who were, quote-unquote, holding the light, meaning consciously aware of the light, choosing not to engage in the war games. There was a call that was put out by those beings, and many of those beings were residing on Earth, on the first Earth, because they were not involved in the war. Those beings residing on the first Earth, those beings that we're calling and that you're beginning to understand were the first Lemurians. They were not involved in that war game. They didn't need to be, because they were third-dimensional beings who had activated and actualized their internal technology. So they didn't have the survival issues that many of the other planetary systems had. And the Lyrans were acting in part as their protectors. So the Lyrans and the Lemurians had developed a friendship. The Lyrans were involved in the galactic wars at that time. The Lyrans were a species who had developed their external technology through weapons and ships, but the Lyrans greatly valued the Lemurians. So it's planet Earth civilization, Lemuria. And again, these are our words. And we'll say as well, this information is newer to Nora just in this year, so you will hear her as she becomes more consciously aware of the information, share more and more throughout the year as her mind can grasp more of it. This is Nora. Yeah, I'll just jump out and share.
Okay.
You know, when I first remembered my experience on Lemuria, I remembered that Lemuria was here on Earth, and I remembered traveling from Lemuria to Atlantis in a ship, and my conscious awareness at that time was that was a boat. I've come to remember more recently that was a craft.
Right.
I couldn't even grasp that back there, you know, as I was newly awakened. It was too much for me to understand and to handle. And then in 2011, I began to access more of my memories of that period of time as the Lyrans began to work with me directly. The Lyrans came in 2010, began working through me and bringing their messages through. And I found their energy to be both wonderful and incredibly disruptive in my day-to-day life. As I began to access the information of my experience, the fuller information of my experience at that time, my personal life became more challenging. And I found myself And John, my partner, I call him my husband. We're not legally married, but we've been together forever. As John as well began to access his experiences from that lifetime, and the trauma the two of us still held, and the conflict that was still between us that was bleeding over from that lifetime into this one, it became a very first disruptive and then incredibly healing and transformative experience to work with the memories of that lifetime. And that's something that I just want to share, because as I channel in this way, to be able to be a clearer channel, I have to work through all my stuff.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It was another word there, but we're on the air, so I'm not sure about what language is fully appropriate in this situation. That stuff,
Yeah, exactly. So that's a lot of what's happening now for all of us here, and it has been occurring to me recently that there is no real true human per se, that we're all mixes and blends and representing various galactic civilizations, and all of these various battles that have occurred throughout the ages are probably, as you point out, simultaneous. So it seems as if we are replaying this one more time before this shift occurs to resolve these issues before we carry these energies into a new creation. Is that accurate?
This is the Pleiadians here again, yes. But we'll let you know the Lyrans, Lemurians are also braiding their energy in now to the transmission as Nora began to speak more about them. They've joined in as well. So this is sometimes how we'll work with you all. And for those of you who are listening, why not pay attention to how the transmission might feel a little different to you right now in your bodies as the Lyrans join us and we braid our energies together and speak in one voice. Just take a breath and experience and appreciate the energy. We'll step back to Pleiadians here and we'll let the Lyrans come through formally now and on their own, so to speak. Greetings. We are Lyrian. We are Lemurian. We are your ancestors, as are every other species in the universe. Yes, this is correct, Lance, in your assertion that all on Earth is a mishmash, so to speak, of genetic material from all over the universe, and this was the intent of the Living Library experience here on planet Earth that the Pleiadians spoke so eloquently about years ago through Barbara Marciniak. The creation of that living library, meaning genetic material incarnate here on one planet, genetic material from all over the universe. That was the original intent for Earth, to be that living library of information. And then as the galactic wars began and increased, suddenly it became clear that Earth could become something else, that Earth could become the staging ground for all of these conflicts and all of these battles. And yes, as each of you resolves your interpersonal conflicts, when we say interpersonal conflicts, those conflicts do not really exist with anyone outside of any of you. So the way it's been presented to you in the past is the example we've given is, let's say a Syrian and a Pleiadian are married, and as they resolve their conflicts with each other in their marriage, in their relationship, that information is transmitted out to the rest of the universe telepathically, and those greater conflicts are resolved, and on some level that's true, that's occurring. But the bigger piece that's happening is you are each resolving your internal conflicts, meaning the aspects of you that are Pleiadian and the aspects of you that are Syrian. We're just pointing out those two races. There are many others who may be in conflict with one another internally as you clear these conflicts within yourself. So you always just assume this is you judging yourself. This is you at war with yourself, and you all are at war with yourselves on some level. It's time for you all to really accept that, realize that, understand that, acknowledge that, so you can clear that war game that you've been playing out internally, transmit that information to the rest of the universe, which then allows for greater universal resolution, including those wars that are occurring millions and millions and millions of years ago from your perspective on the third dimensional linear timeline. So as was said earlier in this conversation, as you clear up these conflicts internally now with yourselves through the use of unconditional love, the energy of unconditional love, and the understanding of yourselves and everyone around you as an expression of love and light, as you come to that, then you change your history. Then it is no longer true that the first Earth was destroyed. Because as you transmit and clear the war games no longer exist, which alters then your current moment.
Are there galactic civilizations that are currently embodied here that are operating in order to control the universe that we know, and for instance, the control that's often referred to as archontic or demigods or archons? This seems to be a very long, hundreds of thousands of year process of dumbing down the human population. The Atlanteans seem to get a big dose of that, being tricked into taking human bodies that started to war with each other. Can you add some clarity to what's going on with those who are running interference for the awakening and our ascension into a reality that doesn't include wars and accumulation of gold and killing each other and all of the violence and the destruction of life forms that we all find so abhorrent?
This is the Pleiadians here again, Lance. Greetings.
Okay.
Everyone will field this question. First, we want to remind you all that there are no victims from our perspective. Every single one of you is a creator being, creating every single moment you experience. So if you are currently being mind controlled, it is because on some level you have agreed to that condition. Now, that doesn't mean consciously you're saying, somebody please control my mind, all right? We want to be clear about this piece. It means you agreed to it, your higher self agreed to the situation for a deeper level of understanding. This is often how you explain karma to yourself. This is our understanding of karma. Karma is about understanding. It's about expansion, and expansion through experience and awareness. Now, the other truth that's occurring in this reality is it's still a reality of light and dark. It's still a polarized game that you're playing out here, although you have now taken the energy of this universe. And we'd like to speak about the universe of the energy as opposed to just the universe, the energy of Earth and the game that's being played on Earth. Because from our perspective, it's all the same. So those demigods and archons and beings that want to control, they're not just engaging with Earth, they're all over the place. Mm-hmm. But from our perspective, from where we view you all now, you have shifted the proportions of light and dark here on the planet now and the universe from that 25-75 split, 25 light, 75% dark, to 60% light, 40% darkness. It's hard for you all to see that because you are exposed still so often to messages that are darker. Mm-hmm. Because what you see played out in front of you through the media often seems to be the darker message. But if you look at your day-to-day realities, for most of you on the planet, you are vibrating in a higher space and you're living in a lighter reality. Now, the other thing we'll say about the game that's been playing out here is in this life, we'll talk with you specifically, Lance. In this incarnation, this is who you are. You're conscious, you're awakened, and you're pretending to be a light worker. And we like to say pretending because, remember, on some level, this is all pretend. Mm-hmm. But certainly in other incarnations, you've played for the dark team. That's the beautiful gift of this reality, and especially planet Earth. It has been the planet where you all have been able to come here and be anything you want at any time. So it isn't that you're trapped in this game. A lot of you feel trapped in the game. You're not. You're not trapped in the game, because in between incarnations, you exist in a much higher dimensional state. And you mentioned much earlier on in the conversation that not all are simply fifth dimensional beings, that there are many higher beings here on the planet at this time. We would say that every single one of you are the highest vibration possible. That's how you begin your experience as a being. You begin with source energy at the highest level possible, at the highest vibration possible, and then separate yourself out. And more often than not, you work from the top down. You spend first in the higher dimensions, because frankly, those experiences are much easier than a third dimensional income.
No kidding.
It's the opposite of playing a video game. So in your video games, as you go up to the higher levels, the game gets much more difficult. All right, in this universe, as you move down, the game gets much more difficult.
Yes, I can verify that. And isn't it true, as you just said, that before we come in from the highest dimensions, we have to align with the galactic perspective, we have to align with the universal, the galactic core, the solar system, the Earth, and so on. We do spend time aligning and tuning to these various vibrations before we can incarnate onto the planet.
Absolutely, or you'd never be able to make your way across Earth. Now, one of the things that we see is happening right now is that there are a lot of maybe what you might call first-timers to Earth. It's not that they're new souls, all right? We want you to ditch that idea, all of you, right now. From our perspective, there's no such thing as a new soul or an old soul, and all that is a game that you all often play with yourselves to both make you feel better and then worse about your life. I'll ask you to clear that program. But because what is happening on Earth is so incredibly exciting right now, and because so much energy is needed on the planet in the form of human life, you have many more beings incarnating as humanoid on Earth than you have ever had before. Now, more often than not, these beings have visited Earth in the past, but they've come to Earth in animal form or in plant form. So when we say there are a lot of newcomers to Earth, it's not even really that they're new to Earth, it's that they're new to being humanoid. And for a lot of people who have visited Earth many, many times as humanoid, you find yourselves typically getting very frustrated by these beings, these other humans around you, because you think to yourself, don't you know what it is to be a human on Earth? Stop. And frankly, the answer for a lot of them is no. And what's really required of you, those of you who get it, who really get what it is to be here, to connect with others as a humanoid from your heart, to be a being of compassion and love, to experience generosity, instead of choosing to feel frustrated by the behavior and actions of those other humanoids, we'd recommend you extend them more compassion, love, and guidance. So this is Nora. That feels like a very good and practical piece that we can all put into play. I mean, I can certainly reflect on my own judgments as they talk about that.
Absolutely. Now, what about a lot of people are concerned about those who are not operating within this density, who are running interference for the shift into higher dimensions. And concurrent with that question, what about the idea that we are becoming extremely densified, that this is the process that we're going through? We're going through the greatest density, knowing that we were going to have our DNA snipped, that we would be operating with less than a full deck of cards. and being subject to chemtrails and GMO foods and the rest of it, all the other stuff that people talk about. So what is the process of reversing or going through the black hole, so to speak, and coming out the other side? What does that look like? And go ahead.
From our perspective, it's all about aligning with the energies of your higher self in real time, in practical 3D reality, meaning, okay, so we'll get more specific about what that means. The integration process from our perspective is this. There are two versions of every single one of you right now. We're simplifying this, so we'll say there are two versions. There is a third-dimensional version of you, and there is a fifth-dimensional version of you. The third-dimensional version of you is what you're referring to as your ego identity. It's the name that you probably were given at birth. The third-dimensional version of you relates to a particular genetic line here on the planet as your family members and your ancestry, and the third-dimensional version of you believes that you are separate from Source, that you are an earthling, that you are here, cut off, isolated from the rest of the universe, all right?
Mm-hmm.
Then there is the fifth-dimensional version of you, and that's the version a lot of you have been referring to or calling your higher self.
Mm.
You've referred to that as your higher self. And for much of this lifetime experience, you have placed the energy of your higher self literally, physically above you. So we often see for a lot of you who had earlier awakening experiences, you began to interact with your higher self, and you saw your higher self as a being who existed in a higher dimension somewhere above, physically above you. All right.
Mm-hmm.
On the winter solstice of 2007, you received a transmission of universal love and light energy from your main sun there, Helios, and from your central sun in our system, Alcyon, as well as many other supportive celestial bodies. And as that transmission came in, that allowed for the integration process to accelerate, meaning your higher selves were able then at that point in time to begin, the only way we can say this is physically occupying your bodies. That's the way you can understand it.
Mm-hmm.
For some of you, it felt at that period of time like a bit of a takeover was occurring, and you began to see things really shift in your reality then in 2008 and 2009 as the integration process accelerated. And a lot of you integrated very quickly and very easily into your upper chakras all the way down through your heart center. It's very simple for you to allow the energies of your higher self or your fifth dimensional identity to really work through the physical body, because you've done so much preparatory work in your energy work, your meditations, your shifting of your consciousness, your clearing out of some of your third dimensional mind's limitations, opening up to your psychic abilities, your intuitive abilities, your healing abilities, and your awareness grew, and then you began to integrate into your lower chakras, beginning with 2008. In 2008, a lot of you suddenly began to re-identify with your bodies in a very visceral and emotional way. So we were talking with you about this earlier, actually, before the show tonight, that there's a big difference between an intellectual and a theoretical understanding of reality and then an emotional and visceral experience of that understanding. And that's what began to occur for all of you in late 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010. You really worked on shifting your identities, and a lot of you at that point in time cleared out much of your childhood trauma. A lot of those programs you had carried with you throughout this incarnation, you felt those experiences no longer identified you. A lot of you began to feel as if what you were doing for work was no longer your identity, and this is true. You are, all of you, universal beings of light and love. That is your identity, and that is your value. What you do for work, how you spend your time, those are simply experiences you're having and choices you're making. So now a lot of you then began to integrate into your first and second chakras as well, the energies of your higher selves, your fifth dimensional identities. What's occurring now, Lance, is the fifth dimensional identity is being given access to the third dimensional experience in a way that was not possible for it. All right, so the difference between, the big difference between a third dimensional reality and a fifth dimensional reality is this. In the third dimension, you have a very emotional experience, and you use your emotions to fuel law of attraction. You use your emotional body to attract to you your realities. You do not use your thoughts to create your realities. All right? You can use your thoughts to understand things, but it is your emotions that has been your main attractor, that has been that magnet for all of you. And that's why a lot of you have found yourselves frustrated by law of attraction, or you say to yourselves, I'm not doing law of attraction right because I'm thinking I'm rich, and all of it is lack. Well, you're experiencing lack because on some level you are feeling poor or undeserving. You're running traumas from other lifetimes that keeps you in that space, and that's the reality you've been attracting. So that's third dimensional reality, but what that emotion gives you is compassion. Compassion and connection with other beings, understanding of another being's experience in a way you can't have in any other dimension. It's why the third dimensional experience is so rich for all of you. It's why you wanted in, because you wanted the emotional experience. And many of you come back again and again and again and again and again to have that experience. And then many of you often will read books or stories or watch television or watch movies that take you on another emotional ride because you can't get enough in your day-to-day. In the fifth dimension, you use frequency states, vibration, to create. You experience emotion in the fifth dimension, but it is a much more diluted experience. In the third dimension, you have the greatest range in the polarity. In the fifth dimension, you don't have that range, and you don't use your emotional body to attract. You use your energetic body to create. And because in the fifth dimension you can create and delete at will, the stakes aren't as high as they are in the third dimension. So it's one of the reasons why this universe went into such a warlike destructive zone. A lot of those wars began in the fifth and sixth dimensions. And you could blow each other up and then re-manifest yourselves again and again and again at will. And it was endless because there was never a finite end to the game. Mm-hmm. So the collective agreement was, let's be as dense as we can. Let's take on the densest experience possible to really get it in an emotional way, what it is we've been doing in this universe, so we can take ourselves through the fifth dimensional identity through a level of understanding and then alter what's going on in the fifth and sixth dimensions. This is that black hole experience you're talking about, Lance. This is, you are literally, we are all turning this universe around from the inside out.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Makes sense. I've been through a black hole at one point, and in fact, I was just talking to a friend of mine this morning who was dreaming about various realities that he was able to access on kind of like a television screen, and there was a black hole that was giving access to these various realities. And it feels kind of like being stretched out to infinity through, from the head to the feet, and then stretched out the other way vertically, and then I went unconscious, and when I came back, I was in whatever dimension that it occurred, and that was about when 9/11 occurred. So there's nothing really to be afraid of, and I think that's one of the things that is so valuable about these conversations and dialogues, is that we remind ourselves that we have nothing to fear, that we are truly okay, that we are eternal and infinite beings of light, and that we are creating these experiences at every level of existence. And these dimensions and frequencies that we talk about are really just like thought forms that allow us to understand a little bit better something that doesn't have signposts.
Absolutely. And, we'll answer something you put out there earlier as well, that piece you were talking about the beings running interference, the reptilians, or maybe even some of the other ET races that you all are familiar with. We'll remind you that you are all connected. You are all one. We are all one. We are all linked telepathically. So if you're sending out transmissions to those beings that you believe are the bad guys, and those transmissions are comprised of an energy that says, stay the F off of my planet, all right? You are not welcome here. You are shutting them out. You are shutting them down. You are inviting the war. Instead, our recommendation is to send transmissions of unconditional love and light, and to remember that that thing outside of you that you are at war with is really an aspect of yourself. Go back to your internal war, your internal battle, your internal struggle. Be more unconditionally loving with yourself. We want to talk about fear for a second as well. It's important for you all to give yourself permission to feel your fear when it arises. We see too often you'll want to try and couch your fears or what you would call your darker or uncomfortable emotions in love and light, and then all you've done is covered up that emotion or that fear with love and light. Our recommendation instead is that you give yourself permission to fully access the feeling in the moment. The fear always is, if I feel my fear, I'm going to manifest that which I'm afraid of. No, you're much more likely to manifest it if you repress it, because as soon as you repress the emotion, the energy wants to go elsewhere and it will manifest physically outside of you. This is how law of attraction works. This is, again, why a lot of you feel like you haven't been very effective at law of attraction. We would say you are all experts at law of attraction. You can't be anything but an expert at law of attraction, because that's the law you've been playing with in the third dimension. You are never not playing in law of attraction in the third dimension. So as you get clearer on what you're feeling, and you love yourself in your moments of sadness, rage, fear, anxiety, anger, darkness, etc., you then are able to clear those seed moments of trauma that created the feeling state in the first place, wherever that moment exists, in whatever incarnation that moment existed. And as you do that, you then clear it completely from your field, and suddenly you find you are more able to consciously direct your manifestation process.
Well, that makes me remember the quote that Bashar keeps putting out there. One of my favorite channels, Daryl Anka, who calls us the masters of limitation. And that's truly, truly true.
And that's that third dimensional mind that we speak with you all about, and we'll remind you, you gave yourself this mind for a very particular reason. If you had unlimited access, you would take yourself out of the third dimension.
Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely right.
This is Nora here. One of the things that they've often said to clients who've been processing abduction experiences or ET experiences, when, I have clients and people I've talked with who have said, well, why don't I remember all of this? The Pleiadians have said, because if you had conscious access to all of those memories, your life would become about dealing with that experience, and that would take you in a completely different direction, and that's not what you'd incarnated to do. This is the Pleiadians here. Here's one of the other things we'll let you all know. One of the best ways to help yourselves remember, at least remember unconsciously, that you are not really an Earthling, is to have experiences with other ET beings. So it is more likely, for all of you listening, that you have had encounters with ETs than unlikely, because you wanted the experience to help you remember you were different, not just of Earth.
it would certainly be wonderful if the majority of belief systems on the planet would be disrupted and shattered a bit so that we can open our minds more to what really is.
This is the Pleiadians again. We would say the majority of belief systems have already gone through that disruption. You all are waiting for some pivotal moment where those you have knighted as the powers that be get on the airwaves and explain to you all that ETs are real. And we've said this before. Disclosure happened a long time ago on your planet. You've been disclosing this to yourselves for a very long time. Know what you know. Know what it is you know, and let that be your truth, and do not sway from what you know to be your truth unless suddenly you know something else. Then let that be your truth. And this is how we want you all to operate with truth. We want you to constantly check within yourself and feel what resonates with you in the moment. Do not hold on to a belief because you believed it to be true yesterday. Check with yourself and see if you still believe it today.
Mm-hmm. In other words, our internal truth is the one that guides us. That is the only thing that is the true star north that we can trust.
Yes, and you can't claim that you want to be sovereign, universal beings of light, and then at the same time need for a power outside of you that you call your government to tell you the truth. They can't exist in the same reality.
Right, that's right. Well, one of the things that comes up is living in this polarity and the extreme duality that's been created to, further separate is what is going to become of the hidden technology that could really liberate the planet from so much suffering that is about 100 years or more advanced and kept in private hands and government hands.
Kaliandra here.
Yeah. Hi, Kaliandra.
I think I'll be visiting with you for just a moment here, and then you'll hear from me again.
Oh, good.
So we feel the most important thing for you all to focus on is getting in touch with and awakening your internal technology. Don't let yourself be distracted by the need for those external advancements in technology. Instead, work on your own internal technology, meaning your own intuitive abilities, your psychic abilities, your telepathic abilities, your teleportation abilities, your telekinetic abilities, and you have all of these things inside of you, stored inside of you. This is how we operate in the fifth dimension. I am fifth dimensional. I am what you all refer to as fairy. And what you'll all find as you further your own integration process is suddenly you have access to these abilities yourself. Then you can allow external technology to manifest that will be a reflection of your internal technology. One of the reasons why you set the game up this way, yes, this is what we say, you set the game up this way, is because on Atlantis, the external technology began to exceed the internal technology, and that created a separation between the male and female energy. It ripped apart the male and female energy during the period of time you all call Atlantis, and that is the number one reason that continent sank. Yes, there are other external forces that came in, but they were all simply responding to that split in the male and female energy, or the yin and yang. We prefer actually yin and yang, because when we say male and female, you still are way too attached all to the ideas of men and women and male and female bodies. We're talking about an energetic exchange between the yin and the yang, the passive and the active energies. So you have not allowed these kinds of external technologies because that is not what you incarnated this time to do. You incarnated to upload your internal technologies. Then you will bring in external technologies that are reflective of the mass consciousness. And these shifts can occur very quickly now because you're no longer operating on the same linear timeline that you were operating in the third dimension. You're not in the third dimension any longer. And if most of you have noticed now, it takes you so much less time to shift your energy than it used to just a couple of years ago. Now you can shift your energy in a matter of seconds. It used to take you sometimes hours of meditating, or it would take you weeks or months or years even of processing trauma.
You know, our internal technologies are so much more powerful anyway, and they don't rely on any kind of constructs or, you know, gadgets or things that have to be built. And it feels that we're moving into the telepathic, that the unconscious is rising into the consciousness, and our collective telepathy is beginning to connect, just as animals and the animal spirits and all of the plant spirits can communicate. We seem to be the last on the list to join the collective and be able to communicate with one another, and that solves a multitude of problems.
Yes.
Such as transparency and communicating with the fairies and the divas and elementals.
Yes.
So, yeah, I love that. That's a wonderful, it's a wonderful answer, and it makes a lot of sense.
Yes, and if you had had access to free energy earlier on, you wouldn't have bothered to seek out your own internal technology and your connections because you wouldn't have needed to.
Now, during these shifts, the shift that's in process or coming, is because as I feel it, it has not really happened yet. In my time, in this timeline in which this body exists, it seems that we've been driving out the fairies and the elementals from the cities because of the density and our disconnect from the spirit worlds. Do you see that? Do you see us reuniting, or are we all going to go up the ladder and find ourselves, you know, being the fairies and the elementals and so on?
Well, that's exactly right, what you said there at the end. But we have not been driven out of your cities and your spaces because we're not third-dimensional beings. We exist in a higher frequency state, and we can make reality look any way we like. So for those of you who are living in heavily populated, urbanized areas, please invite us into your spaces. This is Nora. You know, the first time I really engaged with the fairy, I was living in Chicago in an apartment building, and I invited the fairies into my home space. And I spent the next 2 weeks processing the energy of the fairies and everything that they brought with them into my space, which was wonderful and also a little disruptive.
Well, as a gay male in this lifetime, I used to go to fairy gatherings, and so we had a lot of fun, you know, just laughing and communing with nature and just enjoying the hilarity of everything. So. Is there a connection somehow that, you know, now that I brought it up, it seems that there's so much belief systems that are geared against the divine feminine and against people who are gay or transgendered. Can you speak a little bit about that?
This is the Pleiadians here. We'll come in around this. You know, it's not really about the divine feminine or gay or transgendered. It's much deeper than that. It's about all of you accessing your creator energy through your first and second chakras. So you were reprogrammed to believe that sex was about propagation of your species. You were reprogrammed to believe that. It's not what it's about. The orgasm moment is about full-on connection with source energy and the ability to actualize as a creator being. We'll say this to you as well. None of you are heterosexual. None of you are homosexual. That is not your true identity. You are all universal beings of light and love who connect up with other universal beings of light and love. And at times, you wish to run your energy through another being that you feel that connection with and that love for, and you choose to do so sexually. This is Nora. This is sometimes, you know, a hard piece for people to really grasp, because I think that we've all been very attached to our sexual identities. I mean, I know we've been very attached to our sexual identities here on the planet. And I see it as something that's radically shifting for a lot of people who have already awakened, but incredibly already shifted for those younger generations that are coming in. It's so common for younger people to have sexual relationships with either gender and feel no need to define their sexual orientation. And that's because they are operating from that truer nature that we all experience.
Before we get to take a break, because I know that we're just about to do that, it seems that everything is in some kind of embrace or sexual/sensual communication with everything else, down to the atoms and quarks, and everything is exploding in a kind of an ecstatic union at some level. Maybe one of the collectives could share a bit about the evolution of sexual relations in the higher densities and how we interrelate in those areas.
Golly, Andre here. I'll come in here on this one as a fifth dimensional. So the first big shift is, for all of you on the planet now, you're reminding yourselves to stop running your connection to source energy through another person. That's what you were using sex for. You were using sex to get to God and get your understanding of yourself as God. Yep. So right now, your work, all of you, is to have sexual experiences with yourself, and as you orgasm, feel yourself as source energy. To do that, that means you need to really be having a sexual experience with yourself, which means we're going to ask you to refrain from fantasizing about another being. This is going to be very challenging for a lot of you because you all believe you need certain things, images, experiences to get you off. You don't. You don't need any of those things. Those are just habits. They're beliefs. They're just programs. Now, we'll say this as well. If you are not successful and you find that you have to default to using fantasy, using an idea, using an image, using a storyline to get yourself off, do not judge yourself. This is a big shift that you are taking yourselves through energetically. This shifting of your sexual identities and your sexual energy. And one of the things we're seeing for a lot of you there on Earth is that a lot of you are refraining from sexual relationships right now because you're wanting to do this work within yourself, even those of you who are partnered, those of you who are in relationships. You're finding yourself really needing to work with your own energy, your own sexual identity here, and the reorientation of your sexual identity, so you are doing that work with yourself. Ultimately, you will all get to the point where you will choose to connect up with another who's carrying this understanding as well, that the orgasm moment is about the understanding of the self as source energy, which allows you to link up with yourself as a creator being, and then you can use the energy of the orgasm for manifestation, for instantaneous healing, for all kinds of purposes. And you can play with this a bit yourselves right now, but again, if you're using fantasy to get yourself off, that's not going to be as effective as if you're just experiencing yourself, the energy, your body, the sensations, the connection to source, the connection to your higher self, the understanding of yourself as your higher self, and then using that energy for healing, for manifestation. And we do recommend that you try this. If you have a headache, if you have an ache or a pain in your physical body, that you use this kind of self-orgasmic experience to clear the trauma, to clear the energy that's blocked or stuck. So that's still a physically actualized experience, a third dimensional experience of sexual energy and creator energy. In the fifth dimension, we engage with each other more in the alignment of vibration. And that's truly what you do there anyway, and that's what you were talking about earlier, Lance, as you were talking about all of creation being this wonderful sexual dance. It's vibration aligning with another vibration, choosing to co-create in the moment, then a third version of a vibratory experience. So I, in the fifth dimension, can have an energetic sexual experience, orgasmic experience, well, I can have that anytime I like, but I can choose to have it with another being where we don't need to interact with each other physically because we're not formed in physicality, although we can hold physical form. But sometimes I like to put on a body and have sex that way as well.
I'm in total alignment with everything you just said. It's absolutely perfect. Absolutely perfect. And in addition to what you said about fantasizing, I would say even more, one of the things to add to that would be any kind of pornography or external stimulation, that whatever comes through is pure sex energy, and it just allow it to vibrate and tingle and go through your whole body. And I think that's a wonderful approach, and it certainly resonates here.
This is the Pleiadians here. Yes, we would agree with that, Lance. But we also want to say to you, to those of you who are engaging in pornography or other kinds of sexual activities that you might perceive to be different outside of the box or that have been judged as perverse, you need to move very gently and lovingly with yourselves. Because many of you, we'll say all of you, are holding shame sexually with yourself. You're holding what you would call sexual shame, but it's really just shame. It's the feeling of shame, and you're directing that towards your sexual choices, whether those choices have been in this lifetime or other lifetime experiences. So as you would move through any healing process, we want you to move through from a real place of unconditional love and releasing of judgment.
Absolutely. It seems that the religions, apparently, that we've created have done a wonderful job of adding to our shame and guilt, and so that when it gets stuffed into the shadow and the unconscious aspects comes out in anger and rage and rape and pedophilia and the rest of it. So
it's the distortion of that shame energy and trauma.
Yeah.
We want to be clear about that. You know, any violent act, any act of aggression, you look underneath that action and you are always going to find trauma. More often than not, a traumatized child in this lifetime, meaning the perpetrator, look back at them as a child, see their trauma. But if it's not there in their childhood, it's certainly there in another experience, another incarnation. So you can begin to operate more unconditionally, lovingly with those who are the traumatizers as well, as you begin to understand them as traumatized beings themselves. Not able to have cleared their trauma, not able to even sometimes have recognized their trauma.
Right. Well, if there's any of the collectives that would like to add something more to this, Nora, would you like to take a short break so that we can refresh ourselves and the listeners?
Sounds wonderful. Let's take a quick 5 minutes here.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Had happened long ago. So the original Earthling, the 12-stranded, brilliant, bright Earthling had already been eliminated, and what had remained was the 2-stranded, double-helixed Earthling, and the Lyran Lemurian hybrids took those Earthlings and did genetic experimentation with them until they could create a hybrid species of the 3 lines, Lyran, Lemurian, Earthling. Take a breath, everyone. Process this information and to feel your personal connections. So some of you listening were Earthlings at the time. Some of you were Lyran, Lemurian hybrids. Some of you were Lyrans. Some of you were Lemurians on the first Earth who were destroyed during that experience. But all of you listening participated. because any who are drawn to this information are drawn to it because you want to know this piece of your history. So over time, the Lyran Lemurians were successful in their genetic experimentation and were able to integrate their genetic material into the earthly line here on the planet, and then there was that new hybrid species that was created. And then the reptilians got wind. The reptilians learned of what was happening and set out to return to this planet. They had left this planet. They had come in, taken apart, disassembled, scavenged what they could from Earth and left. They had a few outposts here on Earth at the time, but from their perspective, they were viewing Earth almost as a dead planet at that point. The reptilians were no longer interested in Earth. They thought that they had pretty much eliminated life on Earth. That had been their intent, not just to dumb down the humans, but to eliminate all life. But the Earthling was stronger than they understood. So as the reptilians got wind of the experiment, they knew something was occurring on Earth. They didn't know exactly what, and they didn't know exactly where, but they knew they needed to get there to take care of it. The Lyrans came back, those who had dropped the Lyran Lemurian hybrids off, and expressed the information to those beings, and a plan was put in place to relocate many of the hybrid species, both the Lyran Lemurian hybrids, but also now the Lyran Lemurian earthly hybrids, relocate them to Atlantis in hiding, in secret, so the genetic lines could continue and the information could be passed on, and that was successfully done, that relocation. And then Lemuria, the civilization, was wiped from this planet by the Lyrans using weapons. That was done to erase any evidence of their existence, to confound and confuse the reptilians, and it worked. But it left a gaping hole on this planet, physically, mentally, emotionally, energetically, for all of you. The Lyrans then left Earth. The Lyrans, over time, engaged in many other battles, and for the most part, most of the Lyran species was destroyed. And that was due in part to the amount of shame they were holding because of their actions, their behavior here on Earth. Even though they believed they were acting for the highest good of all concerned, the universe, Earth, the genetic experiment here, they still destroyed many beings in the destruction of Lemuria. The beings who were left split off into two factions of those Lyrans. One group evolved into those fifth-dimensional Faeries, and the other group evolved into those beings that you refer to as the Greys. The Lyrans, Lemurian earthly hybrids who were left on the planet, went to Atlantis, were taken to Atlantis, and began to work with the Atlanteans in helping them to develop their internal technology as a way to help them catch up to what they were already doing externally. And we covered this, or this was covered earlier in this conversation, that that didn't go so well. And there were many other things that occurred on Atlantis. So we just want to know if you have any questions for us at this point about any of that information, that timeline, that history. We've tried to encapsulate it as best as we can. It's a big story, and we've left out many pieces to give kind of the most direct timeline we can.
I think I'm fine with this so far. I want you to continue on so that we can move through the mists of time and understand how these various races continue to develop, which brings us closer to our timeline.
Yes, so as we said then, many Many of the hybrids went to Atlantis. Not all of the hybrids went to Atlantis. Some died during the destruction of Lemuria. And as those beings then interacted with the Atlanteans, they were perceived very much the way we, the Lyran Lemurian hybrids, were perceived in the Lyrans when we first landed on Earth. They were perceived again as God and goddess-like beings, because they had access to abilities and an awareness that most of the Atlanteans did not. We would say most of the Atlanteans did not. Some of the Atlanteans were beginning to develop their own consciousness on their own, in part due to what was happening on Lemuria. You see, Lemuria started first. Lemuria was in existence here on the planet first. Atlantis came along sometime afterwards. So we're talking about a story here that went on for hundreds of years. But energy is shared. You are all telepathic. And there were beings on Atlantis who opened up their consciousness and awakened enough to be able to access information from the Lemurians without understanding that that's what they were doing. And this is how you all operate now, today, of course. One of you awakens and shifts your consciousness, you impact the collective simply with your awareness and how you choose to contribute your light and your energy to this reality. So the Lyran Lemurians worked with the Atlanteans, and then ultimately that split happened on Atlantis, and Atlantis fell. As Atlantis was falling, it took a number of days or weeks even for Atlantis to fall. Many left the continent and traveled the globe. Now, as we look from the bird's eye perspective, of course, all is perfect, because as the Atlantean beings traveled the globe, as they physically left and went to other places, they took with them all of this knowledge, this awareness, this understanding, and seeded what you know to be those ancient civilizations. So you had more of the male or external technology and scientific understanding of reality traveled to Egypt and Babylonia and Asia, that section of the planet. And then you had more of those beings who were in alignment with what you would call the female energy, or the yin energy, traveled to Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England, and you can see the druids growing up out of that belief system and that energy that was seeded there. But what was running through all of it was the Lyran Lemurian genetic information, the awareness of the ET consciousness, and the connection to both the extraterrestrial identity and the fairy identity. Meanwhile, you had the Lyran beings themselves, most dying off, those who were left separating out as the earthlings separated out. So as above, so below. You are all connected in this universe. We are all connected. So those who ran what you would call more of the male or yang energy became the grays. Those who ran more of what you would call the yin or the female energy became those fifth-dimensional Faeries. But they are all one and the same. And what's happening now as your awareness grows is the grays, many of the grays, or the Zeta. And in fact, we have a message to all of you from the Greys. They no longer wish to be referred to as the Greys.
Okay.
At this point, there will be another name you assign to that species as they continue to develop even more, because many of the Zeta now have plugged back in their emotional centers, their emotional bodies, in part due to the many experiences they have had with all of you earthlings over the last few generations in what you're calling your abduction experiences. And we want to be clear with all of you that none of those experiences were actually abductions. None of you were taken against your will. On some level you agreed to the experience, as on some level you agreed to everything else. And for many of you before this incarnation, it felt like a great idea to help out those beings who you consider to be family with the repropagation of their own species, because the Zeta were dying out.
Was that due in part to some kind of continual cloning to remove the emotional body?
Correct. The emotional body was shut down, which meant they were no longer able to access themselves as creator beings, as source energy in the basest way possible, meaning they were no longer able to physically procreate with each other. So they cloned as a way to increase their race, and you can only copy something so many times before so their species began to break down. The humanoid, the earthly humanoid, because it carries, you all carry the Lyrans, Lemurian genetic material, because we share the same ancestors as the Zetas, became their solution.
I've heard that there's an enormous hybrid population that's been created on the ships and on Earth as well. There are probably numerous hybrids from the Zetas. I've seen a few myself. Is there any guesstimate as to the numbers or the percentages?
There are millions of
hybrids.
Yeah. Truthfully, of course,
yeah.
You all hybrids.
Yeah, right, of course.
But many of those beings who are incarnating more recently, that are being diagnosed as autistic or on that spectrum, have a predominance of Zeta Reticula genetic material, and that's why they're having the frequency incompatibility with current collective humanity. And as you all increase your frequency and your awareness, as you stop lying, because that's the thing that these beings cannot tolerate, is the lying. They cannot, it's very discordant to them to hear one thing and know the truth to be another.
Yes.
Do not have the ability to lie in this fashion. So it's one of the reasons why these beings are having a challenging time. This is one explanation for that experience of autism, or what you're calling autism. And of course, there are many beings who are housed elsewhere, and those beings could not currently function at all on Earth. They could not exist here because they have more genetic material that is Zeta than Earthling and humanoid. There are variations on the hybridization program. You know, it's not as simple as you've got beings who have a human mother and a Zeta father. It's not like that. It's more that the genetic material was all put into a pool together, and different proportions were used with different beings. And this is how the hybridization project began on this planet back on Lemuria. And there were many failures in the beginning there as well. There were many beings who did not survive. It was at times quite disastrous, as this at times has been quite disastrous as well. And there are many of you who have participated in the experience here of helping the Zetas, and even though your higher self agreed to be of assistance and to be of help, your conscious mind certainly doesn't hold that awareness, and you do experience trauma from what has gone on while on the ships. And that trauma is real. The feelings of trauma are real. An abused child experiences trauma from those experiences, even though on some level they agreed to the experience before incarnating or during the incarnation.
It seems that the Zetas have expressed a certain amount of concern from some people for the state of the planet, that they're absolutely horrified, as any sentient life form should be, with what's going on here, and the degradation and the manipulation of the the life. Is that something that are they being more gentle at this point? Are they going to be more open? And how is all this going to shift into our immediate future? And then in conjunction with that question, what happened to the reptilians, and who are the major bloodlines that are running the planet at this moment?
This is the Pleiadians here, so we'll come back in to help you out with these questions and this information. So yes, the Zeta are being more gentle, for the most part, with all of you. Not all of them, certainly. There are still Zetas out there who are still operating purely as intellectual beings who have no emotional understanding whatsoever of what it is their behavior and their actions are producing here with the Earthlings. But there are who have awakened and have reconnected with their emotional bodies, who are running that level of compassion and concern, yes, for the Earthlings and for the planet. We wouldn't say that they're horrified necessarily, because they have a greater universal understanding. They have come from warlike experiences themselves, and that in their own history, their own genetic line. So remember that anything that's going on Earth has happened elsewhere in the universe and is happening elsewhere in the universe concurrently, either in this timeline or other timelines. So there isn't that level of judgment. And there's also an understanding that for the game to play out the way it needs to play out, for you all to integrate your higher selves and move through reality in this way, there can only be a minimal amount of interaction and or interference. So for a long while, Earth was what we've called under quarantine, meaning most species could not interact directly with all of you. One of the reasons why meaning physically interact with all of you, one of the reasons why the Greys or the Zetas could is because you share bloodlines. You have that karmic history with each other. The same is true with the reptilians. So when you ask who the bloodlines are, we don't want to get into names. We don't want to get into families. We don't want to get into any of that any longer, because all that does is cause you all to feel enslaved.
True.
I want you all to remember that you are all universal beings of love and light, and if you're not, we'll use one name. If you're not a Rockefeller this time, well, you certainly have been at another time. We all agree that our 12-strand DNA has been, shall we say, snipped to a 2-strand, and then it's been further manipulated since that. So we're probably barely operating on a half a strand. But is there anything to the idea that we are being restored, that our DNA is going to be restored as we come into the full consciousness of who we are? And as opposed to perceiving it as snipped, we'd like you to just perceive it as being unplugged.
Okay.
Because unplugging something, it's much easier to plug something back in than it is to repair a cut or a tear.
Yes, nice.
You were just unplugged. And all of those extra strands of DNA exist in your bodies. You all know this. You've all heard that scientific term, junk DNA, and of course that's what your dimensional scientists will say when they can't give it any other language or can't explain it. When they can't run their scientific method there, they'll just blow it off, so to speak, in this way. And that's because they're afraid to go beyond their own programming, although you certainly have many now in the scientific fields who are awakening very quickly and opening up. And this is one of the things that we see as essential in your development here. It's not about honoring the internal technology or what you're calling the divine feminine over the external technology or the divine masculine. It's not about that at all. It's about the two co-creating together, working in harmony, working in tandem with each other. This is what did not happen on Atlantis. On Atlantis, there was an incredibly competitive energy that developed between the yin and the yang energy, between those who fully believed internal technology and the expression of the internal technology was the right way, and those who were fully believing that the experience of the external technology was the right way. And the reason they believed that was because they believed that not all of humanity would be able to access their own internal technology. And this is something we want you all to look at. Because a lot of you run the belief systems that you are light workers, you are awakened, you are special, you are capable of something the rest of humanity is not. And as long as you hold that belief, you will continue to help to create that as your truth. We want you all to remember that all of you are light workers. There's not a single one of you that is not a universal being of love and light. This is our only standard truth. This is our one truth that we hold. Everything in this universe is comprised of love. Everything. Everyone. We don't care what costume they are wearing in the moment. They are love. So as you begin to engage with each other in this way, as you begin to see those who you perceive to be your biggest, baddest villains there on the planet or off planet, those other beings that you've named your biggest, baddest villains, as you begin to really see them as love incarnate and begin to interact with them as beings of love, this is how you really accelerate your shift. As far as the strands of DNA being plugged back in, so to speak, we don't want you really to concern yourselves with that or worry about that too much, because it's more of a mental game when you go there with yourselves and you start to run competitive energy with yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Say, oh, have I plugged back in my third strand of DNA?
Right. Right, exactly.
You want to experience yourselves as the highest version of yourself as you possibly can be in each and every moment.
As we shift, will the necessity for everything consuming everything else, and bacteria and viruses, and having to eat food and the rest of that, it seems that has to somehow be resolved into a higher reality.
That will all shift as well, of course. One of the big changes that's occurring for you, all right, and we want to be clear with something. You have already shifted. You energetically are already aligning with the fifth dimensional experience. Your physical understanding and interpretation of reality has not yet caught up to your energetic perspective and understanding. But you are very quickly physically catching up. And one of the physical changes that's occurring is that you are shifting from carbon-based light form to silicon-based light forms, crystalline light.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Alejandra here. We don't have to eat in the fifth dimension, to answer your question. We don't need food to survive. We survive on energy, light, frequency, love, and can restore ourselves in a single second. We don't need to sleep, although sometimes we like to sleep, and sometimes we like to eat. Just like sometimes I put on a body and want to have sex in that way. But it's not a necessity, and this is the direction you're all heading. Now, for right now, while you still are holding physical form, our recommendation to all of you is get a lot of sunlight. Take in as much sunlight as you can, because you receive incredible nourishment from your sun, not just vitamin D, but energetic nourishment and support. And then take into your bodies things that are grown in the sunlight. Experience sunlight in that way as well. Dine on the highest vibrational food sources you possibly can in the form of what you eat, what you drink, what you look at, what you read, what you listen to. Everything you take in, all information feeds you. So this is something we want you to be aware of as well, because a lot of you get caught up in reading things that take you into conspiracy theories and very dark paths. Then you are just feeding yourself a diet of fear.
That's wonderful. I'm guessing that would include sun gazing as well, which many have shown you can learn how to exist without food after a certain period of time of doing an amount of sun gazing each day.
Alejandra here, that's the direction you're all headed, and we don't want you to put a clock on this. We don't want you to give yourselves a deadline. We want you to know you have all the time in the universe.
Well, will I have enough time to make this shift before I drop this body?
Pleiadians here, that's a question we often get asked, Len.
Yeah.
We want you to not care. Because as you shift your realities, as you shift out of linear time, you can easily have this body anytime you want. What we hear in you, what we feel in you, what we feel in all of you, in fact, is sometimes still a fear of death. As much as you know, you all still fear that process, not what happens once you cross over. That most of you are very clear on. It's the actual physical breakdown of the body that scares you, that feeling, that experience. So what we'll say to all of you is really give yourself permission to feel that fear, as we said earlier. Don't repress it, don't deny it, and don't need another version of reality. Don't become attached to another version, because that's just you not dealing with your fear. Then, as you deal with your fear and as you clear the underlying issues that are there that relate to that fear of the death process itself, it becomes more likely that you won't experience the death process.
Wonderful. Wonderful. How do the various collectives relate to source of creation beyond all the gods and demigods and polarities? And do you work with the idea of some kind of higher or divine plan unfolding in all the dimensions and beyond that? Did I get enough questions in that one sentence?
I know this is Nora. I completely disassociated there. As you were but first part of that is Lance. Give me the of that question again, would you please?
Okay. This would go to all of the collectives. How do you work with the idea of the source of creation or the source energy, and does that relate to some kind of higher plan that's unfolding here that's most likely, well...
We'll say that we relate to source energy in that all is source. All is an aspect of source. However, from our perspective in this dimension, in this universe, there is a 13th dimension that is source energy. All source energy all go to that dimension to experience being fully encompassed, fully engaged with source. There's no understanding of separation. Is there a divine plan? That's what we hear you asking. Mm-hmm. Yes, divine plan, but it's not created by some big being in the sky called Source. The divine plan is your creation. It's our creation. It is a collective creation here in the universe.
We're all participating in it, and that creates it.
Correct.
Okay.
It's a very hard piece for a lot of you to shift because you were so religiously programmed in this lifetime and many other lifetimes to believe that God is a being outside of you.
Right. And the idea that we could be that God and are that God and you are that God and that we're all participating in creating all of this together, and that it's a co-creative partnership and collaboration, that is a difficult thing for us to comprehend.
And the reptilians are God. We'll say that as well. The reptilians are God. The archons are God. You know, all is an expression of source. And on some level, this is just all a game. Because from that source energy perspective, when you are in that 13th dimensional perspective, all is love. And then on some level, this is all very real. Of course, just like your lives.
Mm-hmm. How do the angelic realms play into all this? We didn't get too much of a chance to go into that, and two of the angelic realms that seem to be mentioned the most are the Elohim and the Nephilim. Or do we need to go down that road as far as labels go?
Nora, you know, I think we don't need to go down that road at all.
Okay, good.
My understanding of the angelic energy as we're experiencing it right now. Within every single dimension, you can find the angelic realm. There is not a separate dimension that is carved out for the angelic experience. It's why our interactions with angels have been so accessible and in some ways accepted by so much of humanity more than any other kind of interaction.
Yes. Many have brought through the information that we have an angelic team or guides, an assembled group, let's say, the collectives that we've been talking to, and beyond that represent a team that we work with, and we may not be conscious of it, but that is always accessible to us. And I think a lot of people are starting to ask the question, how do they learn how or begin to connect with their inner team?
Yes, this is the Pleiadians. We'd like for this to be the wrap-up for this experience with all of you, because connection is key. So we're going to tell you that the way to connect is through the breath and the opening of the heart center. All of you right now, every single one of you, are surrounded by beings of another vibration. They are in your space with you in this moment. And as you breathe and feel into your heart center, you can give yourself permission to begin understanding, recognizing, perceiving these connections. And it's as simple as giving yourself permission to do so. Because this is not about developing a connection, creating a connection, drumming up a connection. It's about recognizing a connection that always exists, that's always been there.
Well, wonderful. All I can say to that is thank you, Nora, and thanks to all who shared with us today, and our other selves and our partners and those seen and unseen that work with us.
This is the Pleiadians here. We love you. We love you. Love you. We love you all, as do the Lyrans, the Faeries, Yeshua, all those other beings who are contributing. And even though their names were not spoken, there were many other beings contributing their energy in this conversation today. So we'll remind you again, you don't need to go through Nora or someone like Nora to access us, to access your angelic helpers, to access your guides, to access any other beings. You simply need to go to your breath, go to your heart, feel the connections. Okay, this is Nora. Thank you so much, Lance and Kevin, for having me on. Larry, I just want to mention you. Thank you. And Anelia for connecting with me in the way you did so beautifully. In Irvine last month. I really have enjoyed in March, the end of March, I really enjoyed my time here with all of you.
Nora, you're going to be doing a wonderful event down in Ojai soon, yes? And
yes.
Do you have a website for those who may have tuned in a little bit late?
My website is noraherold.com. The workshop is this Saturday and Sunday here in Ojai. It is implementation of 5D technologies, a weekend with the Pleiadians, facilitated by myself and Wendy Kennedy. 2 jam-packed days of channeled information and processes to help you all with telepathy and manifestation and healing and other forms of connections, accessing past life and other experience memories, and accessing connections with your guides. So there's still a few seats available. You can show up or you can register through my site. And then I'm also available, of course, for private sessions. And there's a ton of information on my website, a lot of free information, other interviews and lectures I've done. And then there's also some paid content of some of my more recent lectures.
Well, that definitely sounds like something not to miss. If whoever can get to that one, that sounds like a wonderful event.
Thank you, Lance. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. It's our 3rd annual event here in Ojai, our 3rd annual weekend event. Wendy and I have known each other in this lifetime for 17 years, and we've been working together professionally since 2009, and it's been really wonderful.
Wow. Well, you have my deepest thanks, and your energy and all of the wonderful collectives that you brought forth are so much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lance. So much love to you, and thank you for holding such a beautiful space for us to connect.
It's my pleasure. All right. Good night.
Everyone.